At 10 a.m., sunlight cuts across the glass wall of a high-end office, too clean for what is happening inside it. A junior executive sits at the long conference table with a fountain pen in his hand, feeling its smooth, cold surface press against his fingers while a senior partner dismantles him in front of everyone. Not corrects him. Not challenges him. Humiliates him. And in that moment, the room becomes smaller than it should be. The polished wood, the quiet watches, the closed laptops, the faces pretending not to look. His throat tightens. His chest rises too fast. One part of him wants to shout back. Another part wants to break. But what is a man really protecting when he reacts from pain, his dignity, or only his wound? This is where Fudoshin begins, not in peace, but in insult. Not by avoiding the boardroom, but by learning how to stand correctly inside it. The senior partner does not raise his voice. That is what makes it worse. He speaks with the casual precision of a man who has learned how to turn politeness into a weapon. He leans back slightly in his chair, one hand on the edge of the conference table, the other holding the printed report like evidence in a trial. The room is bright, expensive, controlled. Nothing in it looks violent. The sunlight is clean on the glass. The carpet absorbs every footstep. The coffee cups sit in a perfect line beside the legal pads. And still, something in the junior executive feels cornered. That is the strange cruelty of public humiliation. It can happen in a room with filtered water, leather chairs, and a city skyline behind you. No one has to touch you. No one has to threaten you. A sentence can do the damage. A pause can do it. A small laugh from the far end of the table can do it. The senior partner asks, "Did you actually think this was ready?" A few people look down. One person pretends to check an email. The junior executive feels the fountain pen shift in his hand. Smooth. Cold. Heavy enough to notice. He grips it harder than he should. This is the first battlefield, not the senior partner, not the meeting, not even the insult. The first battlefield is the half second before his own pain becomes his commander. Because the body always reports first. Before he has a clean thought, his jaw tightens. His shoulders lift almost invisibly. Heat moves up the back of his neck. His breath becomes shallow, not because the room has less air, but because shame knows how to make a boardroom feel like an elevator stuck between floors. His mind begins throwing options at him, fast and ugly. Say something sharp. Expose the partner's mistake from last quarter. Make the room laugh back. Stand up. Leave. Don't let them see it hurt. Then, just beneath that anger, another pull opens in him. A softer one. More dangerous because it feels like collapse. His eyes want to burn. His throat wants to close. He imagines the humiliation becoming visible on his face, and that thought humiliates him even more. This is the shadow in its true form, the urge to shout back or burst into tears. Not because he is weak. Because he is human. Most people misunderstand moments like this. They think composure means not feeling anything. They imagine the disciplined man as cold, blank, untouchable. But that is not Fudoshin. That is numbness wearing a suit. Fudoshin is different. Fudoshin is the ability to feel the insult land and still not hand your mouth over to the wound. It is the skill of letting anger appear without giving anger the microphone. It is the discipline of recognizing tears before they take the wheel, not shaming them, not pretending they are not there, but placing them under command. The senior partner continues. He points to the second page. This assumption here is amateur. I'm surprised you brought it into this room. There it is. Not feedback. Reduction. He is no longer discussing the work. He is shrinking the person attached to the work. And this is why confrontation is so dangerous. The ego hears an attack on status as an attack on survival. It does not say, "A senior colleague criticized my analysis in a disrespectful way." It says, "I am being erased in front of the tribe." That is why smart people lose themselves in conference rooms. That is why calm people send the email they regret. That is why capable people turn into children for 10 seconds and spend 10 years remembering it. The junior executive looks at the report, but he is not reading anymore. The numbers blur slightly. He knows the deck. He knows the assumptions. He knows there is a reasonable defense for the model. But reason has to fight its way through the noise in his body. The room waits. Not openly. Professionally. That is worse too. Everyone is watching without wanting to be responsible for watching. His thumb moves along the barrel of the fountain pen. Cold resin. Smooth metal clip. The small ridge where the cap meets the body. A private detail in a public wound. The pen is not just an object now. It is the only thing in the room that does not demand a performance from him. And the temptation to perform is enormous. A wounded ego wants theater. It wants a line so sharp that the room changes sides. It wants justice immediately, preferably with witnesses. It wants the senior partner to feel what he made someone else feel. But a reaction from injury rarely protects dignity. It usually exposes the injury to more hands. If he snaps back, he may win a moment and lose command of the room. If he lets tears take over, he may not be wrong, but the meeting will stop being about the work and become about his visible collapse. If he goes silent from fear, he may avoid embarrassment but teach the room that disrespect can pass through him without resistance. So the question is not whether he should speak. The question is, from where? From the wound, or from the center? That is the lens of Fudoshin in confrontation. Emotion is allowed to arrive. It is not allowed to rule. The insult may enter the room, but it does not get to choose the next sentence. There is a version of him, only a few inches away, who reacts without discipline. That version lifts his chin too fast. His voice gets louder than the room requires. He says, maybe if leadership gave clearer direction, the assumptions would be cleaner. It feels good for 1 second. A small electric pleasure. The pleasure of hitting back. Then the room hardens. The senior partner smiles. Now the issue is not the report. Now it is temperament. Now the junior executive has given the bully a second weapon, proof that pressure can make him sloppy. There is another version of him who collapses inward. That version drops his eyes and says, "You're right," even though the critique is only half fair. He nods too many times. He apologizes for things that are not mistakes. He offers himself up as the price of ending the discomfort. The meeting moves on, but something inside him records the surrender. Neither version is disciplined. One is ruled by anger. The other is ruled by shame. Both are reactions from pain. Fudoshin asks for a third path, and the third path is always narrower. The junior executive lets the silence sit for 1 beat longer than his fear wants. Not forever. Not as a stunt. Just long enough to return to himself. The pen rests between his fingers. He loosens his grip before anyone can see that he was gripping it. He places its tip against the margin of the report, not to write, but to remind his hand that it belongs to him. His feet are flat under the table. His breath comes in quietly through the nose. No dramatic inhale. No visible performance of calm. A disciplined man does not need the room to know he is disciplining himself. He looks at the senior partner. Not with hatred. Not with apology. With contact. This is where the confrontation changes shape. The senior partner may still hold rank. He may still control the room. He may still be unfair, careless, or deliberately cruel. But he no longer owns the junior executive's nervous system. That is the first victory, and it is invisible. People miss invisible victories because they want cinematic justice. They want the speech. The reversal. The public defeat of the bully. But the deeper victory is smaller and harder, the refusal to let another person's lack of restraint become contagious. In a high-end office at 10 a.m., under sunny glass, with a cold fountain pen in his hand, the junior executive begins to understand something most ambitious people learn too late. Your career will test your competence. But humiliation will test your command. And command is not loud. It is the space between impact and answer. It is the decision not to make your wound responsible for your words. It is the quiet line inside the body that says, "I can feel this, and still choose how I stand." The senior partner waits. The room waits. The pen is still cold. But now the cold does not feel like panic. It feels like a boundary. Discipline does not begin after you feel calm. It begins in the first second you realize you are about to lose command. For the junior executive, that second arrives before he says a word. It arrives in the heat behind his neck, in the pressure behind his eyes, in the violent little wish to punish the senior partner back. It arrives while the room is still silent enough to hear the faint tap of a watch against the table. It arrives while the sunlight is still lying across the glass wall as if nothing ugly has happened. That is the first practice. Do not answer the first impulse. The first impulse is usually not truth. It is pain looking for a costume. Sometimes it dresses as courage. Sometimes it dresses as honesty. Sometimes it dresses as "I'm just standing up for myself." But if the sentence is born from a body that has lost command, it will carry that loss into the room. So he stops. Not for 10 minutes. Not long enough to look strange. One breath. One clean pause. His mouth stays closed. His tongue touches the back of his teeth. He lets the senior partner's words finish echoing before he adds anything to them. Inside, he names it without drama. Anger. Shame. Do not explode. Do not collapse. That is not weakness. That is command returning to the bridge. The second practice is to bring the body back before bringing the argument back. Most people try to think their way out of humiliation while their body is still acting like it has been thrown into danger. They build a perfect response on top of a shaking foundation. It does not hold. So he goes lower. Feet flat under the conference table. Both soles on the floor. Shoulders down by half an inch. Jaw unclenched. The fountain pen rests between his fingers. He feels its smooth, cold texture again. Not as an accident this time. As a deliberate return. Cold barrel. Metal clip. Cap seam beneath his thumb. A pen can be more than a pen when the mind is trying to run. It can become the smallest piece of reality strong enough to pull a man back from the performance his wound wants to give. He does not squeeze it. He does not tap it. He lets it sit there, cold and exact, while the room waits. This is the anchor. Not a magic object. Not a symbol for other people. A private handle on the present moment. At 10 a.m. in a bright office, with reputation on the line, the pen teaches him one thing: come back to the hand before you use the mouth. The third practice is to shrink the battle. Humiliation makes the moment feel larger than it is. The mind tries to solve everything at once. His future at the firm. His reputation. The politics in the room. The partner's opinion. The silent judgment of the other executives. The fear that this one meeting will become the story people tell about him when he is not there. That is how pressure becomes unmanageable. It expands. Fudoshin contracts it. He does not need to win his whole career in the next sentence. He does not need to prove his worth as a man, as an executive, as a future leader, as someone who deserves the chair he is sitting in. He only needs to choose the next disciplined action. One sentence. One boundary. One return to the work. So he asks himself, quietly, before he speaks, what is the cleanest useful sentence available right now? Not the most impressive. Not the sharpest. Not the sentence that will make the room admire him. The cleanest useful one. The senior partner has made the critique personal. The junior executive does not have to follow him there. He can say, I understand the concern. The assumption is based on the client's Q2 volume trend. I can walk the room through that, or we can mark it for revision. That sentence does not beg. It does not bite. It returns the meeting to the work. That is a blade in its own way. The fourth practice is to separate correction from humiliation. This is difficult because they often arrive wrapped together. A disrespectful person may still point to a real flaw. A cruel tone may still carry one useful fact. If the junior executive rejects everything because of the insult, the bully controls him. If he accepts everything because of the authority, the bully also controls him. So he cuts the moment cleanly. The tone does not deserve obedience. The useful correction may deserve attention. He looks down at the report for 1 second, not as a retreat, but as a way to return to evidence. The fountain pen moves once in the margin. A small mark beside the assumption. Not frantic. Not apologetic. Just a mark. He gives the correction a place to live without letting the humiliation move into his identity. This is a hard skill. Because shame wants to become a biography. One public insult, and the mind starts writing chapters. I am not ready. I do not belong here. They all know it now. Fudoshin refuses that false authorship. A mistake is data. A weak assumption is data. A senior partner's contempt is data about the room, the culture, and the speaker. None of it gets to become the whole man. The fifth practice is to choose the eyes carefully. When people are humiliated, the eyes usually do one of two things. They drop to the table and vanish, or they harden into a stare meant to challenge. Both reveal too much. The junior executive does neither. He looks at the senior partner long enough to acknowledge the confrontation. Then he looks at the report. Then he looks at the room when the answer belongs to the room. His eyes do not beg for rescue from the other faces. They do not search for sympathy. They do not hunt for enemies. They serve the task. This matters. In a boardroom, the eyes can leak panic faster than words. They can ask a question the mouth never says. Do you still respect me? Am I finished? Did I disappear? He does not ask the room to restore him. He restores his posture first. The sixth practice is to keep the voice low enough that it belongs to him. A wounded voice climbs. It speeds up. It over-explains. It tries to patch the hole in dignity with too many words. He does not do that. When he answers, he lets the first word land at normal volume. Maybe even slightly quieter than expected. Not weak. Measured. He does not rush to fill every gap. He does not defend every inch of himself. He gives the facts. He names the next step. He leaves out the poison. I can revise that section by noon and send the room a cleaner sensitivity range. No trembling apology. No counterattack. No theater. Just responsibility without surrender. That is the difference between being calm and being useful. Calm can become passive. Useful has direction. Useful takes the heat in the room and turns it into a next action. The seventh practice is to make the ritual repeatable. Because one good pause in one meeting is not yet discipline. It is a beginning. After this meeting, he will want to replay the insult. He will want to write the perfect comeback in his head. He will imagine what he should have said. He may feel the delayed anger in the elevator, the restroom, the quiet hallway outside the conference room. That moment matters too. So the ritual must continue beyond the table. He closes the notebook. He caps the fountain pen slowly. He does not slam it. He does not throw it into his bag. He aligns it beside the report for 1 second before standing. A small act. Almost invisible. But rituals teach the mind where to return. The next time someone tries to make humiliation public, his hand will remember the cold pen. His feet will remember the floor. His mouth will remember the pause before the sentence. His eyes will remember not to plead with the room. His voice will remember that dignity does not need volume to be real. This is Shugyo inside a boardroom. Not sweat on a mountain. Not some dramatic test far away from ordinary life. A man in a suit. A bright room at 10 a.m. A senior partner with too much power in his tone. A fountain pen held carefully enough to keep the hand from becoming a fist, and calmly enough to keep the heart from becoming a flood. Fudoshin is trained there. In the pause. In the hand. In the next clean sentence, the room does not suddenly become kind. That is important. The senior partner does not lean back with regret in his eyes. No one stands up and says, "That was inappropriate." The glass wall still throws sunlight across the conference table. The city still moves beyond the windows, indifferent and bright. The expensive room remains exactly what it was before, polished, controlled, political. But something has changed. Not outside. Inside. The junior executive feels it first in his hand. The fountain pen is still there between his fingers, smooth and cold, but it no longer feels like something he is clinging to. A few minutes earlier, it had been the only solid object in a room that seemed to tilt. Now it feels like an instrument again. A thing made for precision. A thing meant to leave marks carefully, not violently. The senior partner is still looking at him. The room is still waiting. But the junior executive is no longer waiting for the room to decide who he is. That is the shift. Humiliation had tried to pull him out of his own center. It had tried to make him perform anger, or apology, or collapse. It had tried to turn a business meeting into a public verdict on his worth. And for a moment, it almost succeeded. His throat had tightened. His eyes had burned. His mind had reached for the sharp sentence, the perfect counterattack, the kind of line that would make the room flinch. But he did not give that sentence his voice. Instead, he returns to the work. He turns one page of the report with a measured hand. Not slow enough to be dramatic. Not fast enough to betray panic. The page makes a dry sound against the polished table. His pen rests near the margin where he marked the assumption. He looks at the data, then at the partner, then at the room. "I understand the concern," he says. "The assumption is aggressive. It is not unsupported. The Q2 volume trend is the basis. I can walk through that logic now, or revise the sensitivity range and send the room a cleaner version by noon." There is no tremor in it. No bite either. That is what makes it land. The sentence gives the senior partner less to grab. It does not feed the humiliation. It does not pretend the critique was polite. It simply refuses to leave the ground of usefulness. For one quiet second, the rhythm of the room changes. Not because the bully has been defeated. Because the target has stopped behaving like prey. A few eyes lift. Someone near the far end of the table looks back at the report. Another executive uncaps a marker. The conversation, slowly, almost reluctantly, begins to return to the actual issue. The model. The assumption. The client. The revision. The senior partner may not like that. People who humiliate often want more than correction. They want emotional ownership. They want the other person's face to change. They want proof that the arrow went in. But Fudoshin denies them the spectacle. The junior executive is not frozen. He is not submissive. He is not trying to look invincible. He is present enough to be useful, and controlled enough to be dangerous in the only way that matters here, dangerous to disorder. He writes one clean note with a fountain pen. Revised sensitivity range, noon. The ink moves across the paper in a thin, dark line. Earlier, that same pen had held his panic. Now it records his command. This is how transformation actually looks in real life. It is rarely cinematic from the outside. There is no dramatic music. No speech that changes the culture of the firm in one perfect moment. No instant justice. The senior partner still has power. The office still has politics. The people in the room still have their private calculations. But the junior executive has recovered something more important than approval. He has recovered authorship. The insult no longer writes the next paragraph. He does. That is the difference between reaction and command. Reaction says, because you humiliated me, I must now prove I am not small. Command says, because this room is unstable, I must become exact. Exact in posture. Exact in tone. Exact in what he accepts and what he refuses. He accepts the useful critique. He refuses the reduction of his person. He accepts responsibility for the weak part of the report. He refuses to turn responsibility into self-erasure. He accepts that anger is in the room. He refuses to let anger become the chairman. This is not softness. It is structure. There is a kind of strength that makes noise because it fears being missed. It interrupts. It over-explains. It sharpens every sentence until even the truth starts to look insecure. But there is another kind of strength that lowers the volume because it trusts the line beneath it. The junior executive begins to understand that line now. He does not have to become cold to survive a cruel room. He does not have to become cruel to prove he belongs in it. He does not have to make tears an enemy, or anger a god. He can feel both. He can feel the sting in his face, the pressure in his chest, the aftershock of being spoken to like a child in front of adults. And still, he can choose the next sentence. That is Fudoshin in the boardroom. Not a blank face. A commanded interior. The meeting continues. The partner redirects the discussion. Maybe his tone remains clipped. Maybe he tests the junior executive again with another unnecessary remark. But now the old hook does not sink as deep. The junior executive has found the movement. Feel the pen, lower the shoulders, return to the work, speak from the center. Once a man finds the way back to himself, the room can still be difficult, but it is no longer infinite. It has edges. It has a table. It has documents. It has a clock moving past 10 a.m. It has one senior partner whose words are not the voice of God. And it has a fountain pen in the hand of a young executive who is learning that silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is the forge where the answer is made clean. When the meeting finally ends, chairs shift back. Laptops close. People gather their papers with the careful awkwardness that follows a scene everyone noticed and no one named. The junior executive stays seated for one extra breath. Not to dramatize anything. To finish the ritual. He caps the fountain pen. The click is small. Almost nothing. But to him, it has weight. A few minutes earlier, he had wanted to use words like a thrown object. Now he has used silence, breath, evidence, and one clean boundary. He stands. The report is under his arm. The pen is in his jacket pocket. The senior partner walks out first, still surrounded by rank and habit. The others follow. The room empties back into its expensive quiet. But the junior executive does not leave as the same man who entered. He entered hoping the room would not expose him. He leaves knowing exposure is not defeat when command remains. That is the transformation. The bully's silence is not the silence after someone has been crushed. It is the silence that appears when cruelty fails to produce chaos. When humiliation throws its weight into a man and does not get the explosion it came for. When the room discovers that dignity can be injured without becoming obedient to the injury. The fountain pen rests against his chest pocket, no longer just cold. Now it carries memory. The first touch was panic. The second was practice. The third is proof. A man does not become unshakable because nothing can touch him. He becomes unshakable when what touches him no longer gets to command him. Every person has a boardroom. Maybe yours is not glass walls and senior partners. Maybe it is a kitchen argument, a school hallway, a hospital desk, a late-night email, a commute where one sentence keeps replaying in your head. But the test is the same. Something strikes the wound, and the wound wants to speak first. Remember the junior executive at 10 a.m. Remember the cold fountain pen. Remember the pause before the answer. He did not win by crushing the man who humiliated him. He won by refusing to let humiliation choose his shape. So when your own moment comes, do not worship the first impulse. Feel the heat. Feel the sting. Then return to the hand, the breath, the next clean sentence. And if this story gave you one useful pause, stay with this path. Samurai discipline is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming trustworthy under pressure.